Hi, Tanveer. Thank you for taking out time. This is a special episode, I would say, because it's very hard to get Tanveer's time to everyone. I should say that, and everyone who's listening it. This is a very special episode because we are going to discuss about Tanveer's personal journey and some more crucial, important topics because of the changing environment related to risk domain. So first, let's welcome Tanveer. Hi, Tanveer. Thank you so much for actually giving us time and having these conversation now.
Well, I have to say thank you for inviting me, Richa. I know you've been incredibly patient, um, and we've been trying to get this going for a while, and pressing things kept coming up. But I'm glad we're finally doing this.
Sure, Tanveer. So maybe we can just start with your journey in particular. Like everyone's journey has been unique. So I just want to know from your perspective, how do you describe your own journey? How did you reach here, where you are today, so that audience can get inspired and be motivated by you?
I think I mean that's a very good question, right? Everybody's journey is unique. We're all unique individuals, and we can learn from each other. And I think it's a mix of things. You set out to do. Uh, and stuff happens randomly. Um, in some sense, you try to plan your life, but in another sense, it's a random walk. You can't really predict some of the things that will come up. For me, I think my journey has to start with my parents who came from India. They were born in the north of India in a state called the Punjab. And like many people at that time in the 60s, my father came here for education. My mother then obviously also came. And we grew up in a small town called Hythe, which is in Hampshire, in the south of England. And in terms of the journey, I think parents have a big influence, clearly, by being present. So my father was an electronics engineer. My mother was into the arts, and we would have quite a lot of things lying around the house that were sort of related to those things. And as a young child, you tend to pick up the books and the magazines that are lying around. And I think that was my exposure to things like um, analytical things like physics, electronics. I didn't understand them. I was too young, but I found them really interesting. Um, and I think that planted the seed. That environment was a big influence for me in my ultimate attraction to mathematics, physics, and now things like artificial intelligence. Um, I blame my father for that, for planting the seed. Um, and I think the other thing to mention is it's not just the intellectual knowledge, but it's also the values that they brought. Um, One of the great things about India is, you got hundreds of languages, hundreds of cultures, people of all backgrounds. It's probably the most diverse nation on earth, in my opinion, and therefore equally important to respect each other and and treat each other. And my parents were pretty much models of that. And I think that was also a main driver for why I think I get on with so many people. I like meeting people from different backgrounds. I mean, even in my historic um, ancestral home, which is India, right? There's a lot of diversity there, and I think that gives you a great opportunity actually to meet so many different people. That's the way I look at it. And so coming to London was, in some sense, a culture shock for my parents because London wasn't as diverse in the 60s, and there were some challenges for people coming from abroad. And I think negotiating those challenges, dealing with them, and me watching them deal with those situations was a big learning point. I think it really set me up to be able to deal with um, not just the advantages of diversity, but some of the challenges that come with that. When you're living in a diverse community, not everybody understands each other. And when that happens, you need to be able to deal and communicate your way out of it. So those were the two big influences they had. And then, of course, growing up in London, for me, when we moved to London, it was a fantastic city. It still is an amazing city. And I had the advantage to go to schools which were very, very mixed in every way. And I think to me that was an advantage because of my upbringing in in meeting so many people from different backgrounds. I think I was really, really well placed to integrate into those very mixed schools. And I got on with everybody. And my biggest compliment I had was when people said to me, "Look, you're a guy who can get on with anybody." I said, "Well, that's what we want. We're all the human race, right?" Yeah. So that would be my, parental upbringing, moral values, treating people with respect. And you'll see that as we talk more, because I know you want to ask more questions. Um, this idea of treating people with respect ultimately feeds into the ability to get on with people at work, in your local community, um, in your sports. You know, it feeds into everything. And if you can get that right, um, you will find that this ability to get on and build relationships with people at work will pay off in later in your career, because you never know when you need someone to help you. And that's where those relationships will be very, very powerful.
Yeah, it's like world is a small stage, and you run. It's and also there's a Brownian motion. It's a random event that can happen, and two people can meet again. It's not like you know, it- it's
That is true. In fact, I like the way you said that, because I remember my I used to teach when I was at university. Most graduates try to do tuition to earn a bit of extra money to pay those fees, right? And I remember teaching a guy many, many years ago in my bedroom, and he would come and we would do mathematics. And he actually asked for my help on the street. He came up to me and said, "Look, you're so and so. I've heard about you from the school. Can you help me in maths?" At the time, I said, "Sure. Come round to my house and we'll meet every Sunday." So we must have met for about 10, 15 weeks. A really smart guy. And he went on to get grade A in his A levels. Okay, that's great. Well, fast forward maybe 10 years, and my younger brother went for an interview at one of the large banks. And when he met the interviewer said to him, "Are you Tanveer's brother?" Now, my brother was taken aback, because it's not the sort of question he was expecting. He said, "Yes, he's my brother." And the interviewer, the hiring manager, said, "Your brother taught me mathematics 10 years ago." and,
that's a
and
nice example to correlate with.
Yeah, and I don't think I actually took money from him, because his circumstances were, the way he approached me was, he said he was saving from his um, paper round. We have this thing called paper round, where when you're 15, 13, you go around delivering newspapers, and you don't get very much per week. And what touched me was when he said, "Look, I'd like you to teach me maths. I have been saving from doing my paper round. I've been saving money to pay for my tuition." So when I heard that, um, I said, "Look, you don't need to pay me for this, right? Save that money for something else that you'll need." But I think at the time I didn't do it thinking, "Oh, he'll pay me back." I didn't do it for that reason. I just genuinely didn't want to take that money. I admired his courage to want to learn and work. So when my brother went in for the interview, he said, "Your brother taught me maths." He remembered, and uh, I'm sure it wasn't the only reason, but my brother got the job. So in some sense, there is some truth to karma, that if you try to do good, I mean, I'm not saying I've done good, but if you do good in the world, there's a chance it will come back in some shape or form. Maybe not to you, but to something that matters to you. So yes, you are right.
Wow. Such a profound story, I would say that, because I was just discussing about this random events, and this is a nicely put example to correlate with this situation. Definitely. And Tanveer, to that point, I wanted to ask you, in this case, you have been studying a lot, and I know, like, someone may call you who might like listen to your story would say that if you would have heard of Big Bang Theory, you're like Sheldon, Sheldon character in that series. To me, this is what I can picturize like that. But like, how do you? What motivates you to keep going every single day? How do you like learn every day? What motivates you?
I think that's an interesting question, um, and different things will motivate different people. For me, I probably link it back to my childhood, and I mentioned all those, books and encyclopedias around the house that my father would buy, and I think by reading those, and the idea of knowledge and understanding, the feeling that you understand something or you know something, is a certain type of feeling, right? When you learn something, and I think it probably, I can relate to that. I want that. I want that feeling of learning something, right? So, mathematics. Mathematics is a subject that you can't just learn it and that's it. You have to keep doing it. You really have to keep doing it. And you're learning new techniques as you grow older and you meet different environments. So, for example, going from a university into a postgraduate, there's a new set of maths and physics that you come across
Yeah.
because you're excited by those things that you. So that habit of learning, I think, positioned me well. So when I went into finance and banking in my career, I was faced with learning new things. So, for example, when I joined KPMG, it was called Pete Marwick in those days,
Okay.
and eventually it became KPMG. And you had to do these, um, what do they call them? Conversion course. So when you join to train as a chartered accountant, for example, you have to do these conversion courses. So unless you already have an accounting degree or something like that, so if you've got a maths degree or physics or history, you have to do these conversion courses, which sort of bring you up to speed with accounting, financial accounting, management accounting, quantitative finance, right? And those are typically from memory like 12 weeks. And KPMG, a great firm, one of their rules was, look, we're all going to do this exam at the end of the 10 or 12 weeks, and you have to reach a certain percentage. From memory, it was something crazy, like 90%. You have to get 90 or maybe 80%. You have to reach that mark. And if you don't, your contract will be terminated. Right? This is when you join the firm in the first sort of 6 months, right?
And they didn't told before.
No, no, they make it clear before as well. As,
Before as
as
well.
you
Okay.
as you interview that, look, we take these conversion courses seriously. We want to know that you're committed. So coming back to your what motivates you to learn, there's an example of motivation to learn. You're going to lose your job,
Yeah.
and so I remember it had been a while since I'd last done an exam. When I joined KPMG. It had been a while since I did my postgraduate exams. I hadn't really sat any exams. And I thought, oh my God, will I be able to do this? Maybe I'm very rusty. But I then, got into the discipline of studying and doing the questions. And I found that the same old technique that helped me in high school and university was now coming to help me with these exams. And and when you apply these techniques of reading, doing questions, rewriting things in your own words, things actually become interesting. I mean, that's an interesting phenomenon, right? You can turn even
Definitely.
boring things into interesting things because you're answering questions, you're trying to solve problems. And that was an example of, the motivation was you got to keep your job, but at the
Yeah.
same time, you're learning something.
Yeah.
So there were two forces pulling me. And that's been the case when I from KPMG, I went on to HSBC, and then at HSBC, I was responsible. I initially started off in group finance, where one of my first jobs was to give advice to somebody in Hong Kong. I was based in London, and literally like in the first week of joining, somebody sent me an internal mail asking me how to account for, was it a lease or something like that? Out in Hong Kong, there was some business to do with purchasing or selling a lease, and there was some nuance to it. And so I got this message saying, please advise on how we should account for this. And I know you and I have spoken about in the past imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
So when I was at KPMG, one of the great things there was you had great managers and partners. So if you did a piece of work, they would review it, and then the partner would review it. So you got this real quality control, and you drew comfort that what you were saying, can be corrected. But here I was at HSBC, where somebody sent me this message, and my initial instinct was to look over my shoulder and say, okay, who else can I ask to review my work? But the difference was here, there's no one. That's why HSBC hired me. They said, no, that's actually your job. You've got to give that opinion now. It was a really funny feeling, thinking that I'm sending out something that comes from me, and it better be right. So learning, getting confidence in your ability also helps you and motivates you to want to learn more. And then from HSBC, I went to work for JP Morgan. And suddenly now I'm on the trading floor with lots of market risk, and how to measure it and how to, manage it, more learning. But now by that time, I'd gotten used to this idea of learning and being motivated for it. There's always a motivation to want to learn something, okay? If you don't have that motivation, it's very difficult. So I guess what we're saying here, Richa, is if you want to learn something, first make sure identify your motivation. Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
Okay, and so it continues when I went and worked in some of the other places. Yeah, so
Ex
get your motivation.
exactly. Like the core thing that we discussed here is identify the why we are learning this, like what
Yes,
is motivating you. Otherwise, you may just read it and you'll not understand it if there is no motivation attached to it.
I
And
think
yeah, and Tanvi, you were just saying about imposter syndrome. So I think everyone has imposter syndrome. Did you had that, like in the past? We discussed that there is a way to overcome it. So how did you manage to cope with it? And
I
maybe you can
think
tell us.
I think the term imposter syndrome has sort of become a term, right? It was never a term when I was early in my career, but we kind of understand it, and I think, in fairness, many people feel it if they're being honest, um, if they're being true to themselves. That there are moments when you think, "Do I really know my stuff?" And that's a healthy thing. I think that's actually a good thing. The opposite is to lull yourself into a false sense of superiority on something, um, and you can end up giving completely the wrong advice. So I think it's imposter syndrome is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think in terms of overcoming it, I would say to help you get over it. Let me think about that. I think what you got to do is you got to remind yourself of who you are and what you have achieved. Okay, now this is important because imposter syndrome can also be connected with loss of confidence, right? You don't have confidence in yourself, and therefore you get these feelings that maybe you really don't know anything. And I think you've got to start by saying, hang on a minute, I've got some solid qualifications. Um, I've passed exams. I am capable of doing things. I have experience that has been acknowledged. Otherwise, people wouldn't give me jobs, right? So you've got to start reinforcing this confidence in yourself, and I think you've got to also be accepting of occasionally failing, right? You got to be accepting of the idea that, look, maybe sometimes, hopefully few, I might get something wrong, but if I do, I know how to get back up and deal with it, right? Um, so part of imposter syndrome may be that people just don't want to fail, and that makes them really, really nervous. and therefore they freeze up. I think, yeah. So knowing that other people have validated you and given you the confidence and trust you with your decisions, you've got to reinforce that all the time. Remind yourself of that, okay? And I think you've also got to remind yourself of all the other things you have done, because you are really the sum total of all the things you've achieved, okay? And that's something. Um, so yeah, we all feel now and then imposter syndrome, but you've got to then stop, pause, and remind yourself, hang on, I've come this far. I must know something.
Definitely. I think um, I really understood this idea that you were saying if you are having some doubts, replace it with the reality that, some past experience you had in your career or in your education, academics, that
Yeah,
would really reinforce that idea. I will follow that actually because more and more I feel like that sometimes, to be honest.
no,
And
but you summarized it well. I think you summarized it well, and I think that's advice for all of us, right? And it's important to realize that you're not alone. That there are other people, and some have the courage to come out and say, "Look, I feel like an imposter here. What's going on?" Some internalize it, uh, but either way, we all feel it now and then. And like you and I said, it's important to occasionally give yourself a pat on the back and say, "Hang on, I do know a few things here."
definitely, otherwise, like if you need to be confident enough, you should also keep on reminding yourself that what you have achieved in the past, and you can, whatever, however you feel, you can overcome this through the basically back of the knowledge that you have gathered so far. Like you mentioned, your sum total of your past experiences, what you have done so far, your achievements. You should need to keep on revising that thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. You are your own boss, and you've
Yeah,
got to continue to invest in yourself.
correct. This is one of the advice which I will follow. But is there any other life lessons that you want to like pour in for the audience? Because I know that you are like full bag of all the lessons. You are so experienced in these cases. So would like to discuss.
Well, I'm flattered that you feel I have so much experience. I think in the hustle and the bustle of
Yes.
London, New York, um, any busy city, motivation is the secret to many success stories. Um, I'm a big believer in that. I think everybody's path to success may look different, but what is certain is that motivation was a crucial part of achieving your potential. And that motivation could be, through connecting with people who challenge you. That's important. Uh, you must find, good, well-meaning people who are prepared to challenge you, and not just keep saying yes, yes, yes. Um, who can expand your comfort zone, right? Sorry to use a cliche, um, but there are many people who stabilize in their comfort zone, um, and I would say um, surround yourself with people who've got very positive influences. That's actually quite powerful. Um, Let me explain that. Almost every interaction you have, everyone, every interaction you have with a human being can be classed as positive or negative. Positive if it energizes you, if it makes you feel better. Negative if it drains, if it takes a bit of energy away from you, makes you feel a bit more down. So, for example, this exchange we're having, honestly speaking, I feel this is a positive interaction. Why? Because I feel energized by the sort of questions and your real interest in learning new things. And you're engaging in a way that we can talk about things that we both like to do. Uh, when you go and buy vegetables in a shop from the seller, is that a positive experience or is it negative? Well, it's usually a positive because the person smiles and you smile back. That makes it a positive experience, right? But on the other hand, if you're touchy feely, you grab your apples and don't even say thanks, maybe to the shopkeeper it's a negative experience. They may have sold you the apple, but the exchange wasn't something they
Nice
wanted.
enough. Yeah.
So everything in life it can be seen as positive and negative. So the general principle is, if you have people who are generally quite positive, right? Whenever you meet them, 9 times out of 10, you feel good about it. Hang on to those people. But if you have people who drain energy from you, who bring you down, honestly, the best thing you can do is slowly move away from that. That's an important lifelong journey lesson. Okay, and the other thing I would encourage is remain engaged. Uh, Try to remain engaged and interested in your work, your activities. You've got to do that actively. You can't expect that to happen passively. Um, Try new approaches. Um, Try to look for opportunities to make an impact. Okay, and be open to this whole improvement process. Additionally, I would say don't forget about the learning that you just, you don't just get learning from work, you also get learning from family. That, think about that. Taking time to,
Definitely.
you've got to take time to do things that you like, to help you keep you motivated and interested. So I do think with the right motivation, dedication, you can have the potential to reach the heights that you want to achieve, whether it's in London, New York, um, Mumbai, um, Paris, wherever you're from. That those are the key elements.
Tanveer, you won't believe whatever you were saying was like your next point was already in my mind. I'll tell you how. When you were saying how people leave positive and negative experience, and I was already thinking about it that I will put in this point that you should also analyze like while leaving the person that you are having interaction with or some place, you should actually analyze it how you're feeling about it, like whether it drained your energy or increase your energy levels. This is so important because you need to, time is so short to waste on such uh, things, right?
Yeah,
So
I was.
and the second point, when you said 9 out of 10 times how you felt with people, it is also important to give them benefit of doubt that maybe today it
Yes.
was not their day and somehow it reflected on their attitude. And exactly, I was thinking about it when you were saying that. So, whatever you said next was already, some of the points were already in my mind that, yes, that could be the cases. And yeah, you discussed that as well.
Yeah, and I think giving benefit of the doubt is a very important quality. We can't have perfection in us and in others. Realizing that occasionally people can have a bad day.
Yeah.
You don't judge somebody just on one-time experience. I mean, try not to judge at all, but if you're going to form an impression, you've got to see a track record. And I think you're absolutely right. And humans are pretty good at identifying individuals who are positive to them and not positive.
Yeah.
So the rule of life is try to surround yourself with positive people who challenge you, who you learn from, um, who lift you up. And the good news is that there's plenty of people like that in the world.
Definitely, yes. I would totally agree with that. I have to somehow digress with this topic because I also want to discuss questions related to risk domain, Tanvir. And the most notable change that we are seeing these days is evolving field of AI. So, as per your experience and what you have noticed, what are the emerging changes in these field of AIs, and one should look out in finance and trading of fintech?
That's a good question. I mean, AI is now, um, pretty much everywhere, right? Um, your phone, your cooker,
Yeah.
your fridge, the so-called Internet of Things. Uh, Supporting all of that is this concept of artificial intelligence, which are these self-learning, self-adapting algorithms. Um, and I think they're going to affect each of us actively or passively, and they've already influenced our lives. Right? We all use smartphones. Most people in many countries have smartphones. Uh, and the smartphone will tell you, how many steps have you taken, tell you a little bit about your health. Um, it will prioritize certain emails for you. So AI is working in the background. And for me, the way to answer that question is not so much as a layperson. I mean, this is the field that I'm professionally engaged in. So for me, uh, the question comes down to treating AI as models, looking at AI as a model, as a representation of some sort of reality. Um, AI, in many cases, is really machine learning, right? And most of AI in banks are advanced machine learning techniques. And I suppose at a human level, one of the things that you need to think about is how do you interpret, how do you understand what the AI is doing? So, given a set of inputs, you get an output based on what the AI has done in the middle. And sometimes it's not obvious or explainable how the AI arrived at that answer. I'll give you an example. As people can apply for a loan from their bank. In the old days, there used to be a some clerk or manager who would review your
Yeah.
case, right, your
Yeah.
application. They might make a few phone calls to find out ultimately, will you pay us back? Are you reliable? Nowadays, because of the way the market has grown, thousands of people apply for loans. Banks they can't hire so many people to look at every customer. So this is where these machine learning techniques have been utilized. Um, and what the machine learning program might do is take certain inputs about the customer, obviously their name, date of birth, income, if they have it, their payment history, um, a number of factors about the customer. And based on that, without even talking to the customer, the the program can make a recommendation of decline or accept, right? Now, you'd like to think that there would be a human at the end of a decline decision to try to understand that before you communicate it to the customer, hey, but by the way, we're declining your loan, that you're in a position to explain why, because a customer may be really interested to know, why did you turn me down? Um, you whether there's an appropriate reason or whether it was a mistake, either way, you've got to be able to answer that question, right? We live in a society where people are entitled to know, why did you turn me down? Because I want to participate too
Yeah.
in whatever. So sometimes it's not easy to do that because the AI or machine learning program is like what we call a black box. There's a lot of computations going on, and it's not clear which particular reason is attributable. So in other words, was it the income levels, or was it where the customer lives? What was the actual reason, or was it a combination of reasons that the customer wasn't eligible? Another example is in financial crime, where when you onboard customers, you've got to do what we call KYC, know your customer. It's the law. You have to do it, and you must do it. And we use artificial intelligence, machine learning programs to make inferences about customers. Now, many of these techniques are statistical in nature, right?
Yeah.
And because they are statistical, there's an element of uncertainty. You cannot be 100% sure
Sure.
that,
Yeah.
that the outcome is correct. So these are some of the challenges that AI is bringing. So as a professional in the field, my instinct would be to look at model evaluation.
Yeah.
For example, what methods were used to evaluate the performance and the accuracy of your model. I would be interested into what specific metrics are you using? What's the yardstick you're using to decide that something is working appropriately? It's not discriminating. It's following the law. So it gets quite involved. But from a public's point of view, I think I would encourage all of us to learn as much as possible about what is AI, um, what it can and cannot do. And there's a lot of literature out there, by the way. You can go onto Amazon. There's some really good books, introductory books written
Yeah.
for non-technical, from a non-technical perspective. So you don't have to have an advanced degree in mathematics to at least have a foundational knowledge. And this actually comes back to your first question or earlier question about motivation for learning. I think, for me, I find it very motivating to want to know about this new technology, and I hope many people in the public feel the same way. Um, yeah.
The another point, which is, I would assure you that this is going to be my last question to you, Tanveer, because I understand that time is what you have very scarce because you have back-to-back meetings and you are so busy. My last question with you is the most important topic that we are surrounded with these days is GPT-3. So with increasing use of large language models, have you seen this significant impact in fintech as well? And what are the potential risks associated with this implementation that you see in the industry,
So,
particularly in the areas like hedge funds? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
right. So I think large language models, um, these are huge training data sets where what companies like Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, and others, they've used essentially the internet, what's available on the internet, to train these models. Now, it gets quite technical, but in simple terms, if you look at every possible way you can complete a sentence, right? Um, for example, how are you? So the word how as a first, how are you? That could be a reasonable sentence. Another way to complete the sentence is, how is this done? How tall are you? How much money do you have? Right? The word how, you can have hundreds of thousands of ways to complete a sentence. Agreed? And likewise for any other word. When you start with a word like the, you can imagine there's so many ways to complete that sentence. Now, what these models have done, they've kind of looked at every possible way on the internet of how people use sentences. Okay, so it's not like just make up any set of words following the. So I could say the table computer is that, but that's a meaningless thing, right? So what the models have done is they've looked at actual human um, writings, human exchanges, and they've learned how humans complete sentences. And so what they do is they try to estimate in a particular situation when you ask the AI language model a question, we call it a prompt. You give it a prompt, which is the sentence or the paragraph that you use to get an answer from them. Based on how you write your prompt, the AI will then try to complete paragraphs which it thinks are relevant to the way you have phrased your question. So it'll come up with an answer which, remarkably, in many cases, is quite impressive, right? It looks
Yeah.
sort of intelligent, looks reasonable. It's as if another reasonably intelligent human had answered your question. But of course, they've been trained on virtually every thing that's been published on the internet. So they've come to learn what could be a plausible looking answer. But they also suffer from can suffer from something actually quite important, which is bias. So
Yeah.
when you and I go hunting for information, we like to feel that what we get back is reliable and accurate and true, right? So who was the first president of the United States? Well, it's relatively easy. You'd think the AI will say George Washington. Um, those are easy, right? But there are more subtle situations. In this case, if the answer was Thomas Jefferson, because you know the answer is George Washington, you're able to spot the inaccuracy, right?
Yeah.
Now, suppose you didn't know the answer, then you can't spot it. and you would walk away thinking, oh, Thomas Jefferson is the first president of the United States, because you were not in a position to challenge it. And this is where fake news, misinformation comes alive. It relies on people's lack of knowledge of a situation, and it can be used to peddle misinformation. So it's really not the same as looking at, for example, the Encyclopedia Britannica. You mentioned Big Bang earlier. Imagine somebody wanted to learn about the Big Bang, right? You can go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, and you can be reasonably comfortable that what you will find has been curated, reviewed by competent people, and often people with different views, so that all the debates have been settled and you've come up with what is a very reasonable, accurate, reliable piece of information. That's what you get with the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's not always the case that if you ask that question to some of these large language models, that you will always get an accurate answer. Sometimes you'll get the wrong answer. But if you're a student, for example, or even an adult who wants to learn something new, and because you're not in a position to challenge, you're walking away with an inaccurate understanding of the truth. And that's where large language models, um, you really have to be careful um, in how you use the output. I would not use the output of large language models for high stakes matters. So take an extreme example, um, life and death. When you're in a medical A&E, um, I don't think doctors would search up large language models to describe the symptoms and work out what the treatment was. That would not be acceptable. Um, they would refer to their colleagues who are trained practitioners on how to treat a patient. You really don't want a large language model deciding that. Similarly with AI, right? When you're driving a car and you're planning, on the German autobahn where you can go at very high speeds, right? I mean, you can't do that in London. Here motorways have a speed limit of 70 miles an hour, and the inner city is about either 20 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour, depending on where you are. But in some countries, you can go on the motorways where there's not a speed limit. So you want to drive your car at 150 miles an hour. Maybe, I don't know why you want to do that, but maybe you want to do that. At that level of speed, you really need to make sure that whatever controlling the car is kind of really precise, because it's a life and death situation. So in those situations, I would never drive a car fully autonomously at that speed. I would never let the car decide how to steer and when to put on the brakes. Better still, I wouldn't go at 150 miles an hour. So the point I'm making is AI, there's a very statistical nature to it. And we can get very technical because it's a really technical subject about what sort of metrics, what sort of specific model metrics do you use to gauge performance? And we have metrics, we have ways to measure how accurate these models are. You can imagine a lot of statistical tests are involved, but maybe it's a stretch too far to expect the public to understand. Not because they can't understand, but maybe not everybody has the same training in statistics, for example. So to understand how the model has been tested and in what diverse situations and how representative has that data set been in training your model. Because if the data set is not representative, you're going to get some really, really wacky answers. So it gets quite involved. And most recently, I would say, in some of the research papers that I'm looking at, there's sort of statements that these large language models may now be suffering from a deterioration in performance, because by being open to the world, you can imagine, children from as young as 5 prompting it, putting maybe sometimes slightly childish statements, and then you've got adults, and when you mix it all up, this language model is being trained on what these people are saying. And if you say something ridiculous enough times, and there's enough people in the world who write that, and your model is
Yeah.
trained on that, the model will start repeating what you've written. So one way to think about it, Richa, is humans, right? At least we still, I think we still have moral values, and we are able to decide that a lie, no matter how often it is repeated, can never be true. Make sense? As a
Yeah.
human, you can spot that if I kept saying to you that London is the capital of Turkey, you know that's not true. But even if I said it to you 1,000 times, and even if I got 1,000 people to repeat it, you would still be able to say, no, that's not true. With language models, if you have enough people, or certain people who have multiple entries into the training data, feeding it false information, it's quite possible that the AI model will start just repeating that, because that's what it really does. It's not coming up with something of its own. It's repeating what it's hearing. It's a bit like a child, a baby. You better be careful what you say in front of a young baby, because they can repeat what you say.
Repeat. Also, it's
Yeah,
like garbage in, garbage out.
garbage in,
Where,
garbage out, and sometimes deliberate garbage in, garbage out.
yeah.
So you have to be careful. We're entering a new era where, in the old days, you had people, they read books, historians, they debate with each other, they fight it out, and the truth eventually, is what gets published. Because there's enough. If you write nonsense, there's going to be a number of competent people who'll spot it.
Yes,
They'll point it out. They'll call you out.
exactly.
Now with AI, we're entering into a new environment where people are the message is just be careful what the output, how much reliance you put on the output. If you want to use it for entertainment, whatever, that's fine, but not for high stakes decisions.
Yes. Good key takeaway, I would say. Yeah. Thanks, Tanvi. Thanks for your time. I
No,
would
I,
say
I loved it. Let's do it again.
definitely, Tanvi. Thank you so much for your time. I would say it would have opened so many people's mind, yeah, this is how they should do, and never to rely completely on what is fed into them. It could be garbage as well. And
Yes,
do their own reasoning, especially when the high stakes are involved, like you said. Definitely,
absolutely.
Tanvir. Yeah,
And yeah, look, let's do it again. I really like this.
definitely, Tanvir. Thanks again.
See you, Rita.
So bye.
Bye.